I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
There's a lot of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Oh, for crying out loud. So apparently, it doesn't like the link to the intro video now. So you guys get to watch me put the link in and everything.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it says this video doesn't want to play. What the fuck? What do you mean I can't lie in court? Hell hath no accountability gap like the accommodations given to a woman scorned. Last week on HBR Talk, we began a discussion on the gender disparity and accountability for criminal acts. We went over several points that were highlighted by two researchers in two separate reports. Jill K. Dorner's 2009 doctoral thesis, Explaining the Gender Gap in Sentencing Outcomes, an Investigation of Differential Treatment in U.S. Federal Courts, and Sonia B. Starr's 2012 report, Estimating Gender Disparities in Federal Criminal Cases. Both reports highlighted an inability to explain away the criminal justice accountability gap as a result of differences in criminal behavior or the perpetrator's life circumstances. In fact, some areas of disparity indicate that family circumstances which elicit prosecutorial and judicial sympathy for women appear to lead instead to greater umbrage when the defendant is a man. Consideration of that, and of the increased gender disparity in outcomes in drug and gun cases, where there is also a racial disparity, ties the gap in part directly to authorities' association of obligatory conscientiousness and culpability for one's actions with overtly stereotypical masculinity. This is further evidenced in two areas. One is in financial obligations imposed on non-custodial parents and ex-spouses, which leads to several egregious abuses to which we will be dedicating next week's discussion. The other is in the impact of gendered intimate partner and sexual violence law on the gap in criminal outcomes when abuse is reported. U.S. federal domestic violence law, lobbied for extensively by feminists, has written into it the presumption of male-perpetrated female-experienced abuse. The law funds research on violence through that specific filter to be done at facilities that serve only women. It mandates that law enforcement, prosecutorial, and judicial response also use that filter, and establishes tracking of statistics based on those responses. It uses dispensation of funding to mandate harsh penalties for men and boys convicted under its edicts. It is, essentially, a confirmation bias machine with teeth designed to only bite into accused men and boys, and only on behalf of accusing women and girls. In our discussion, we touched on the way this shelters female perpetrators of intimate partner and sexual violence from criminal culpability and censure. Emily M. Douglas and Denise A. Hines stated in their report the help-seeking experiences of men who sustain intimate partner violence, an overlooked population, and implications for practice, that men abused by female partners face severe barriers to justice, including failure of police to respond to criminal complaints, ridicule instead of assistance when police do respond, response ending in non-arrest of a demonstrably violent partner, and being treated as the perpetrator rather than protected from their perpetrator. VAWA's gendering of criminal culpability for intimate partner violence has led to areas of abuse which almost exclusively affect male defendants at the behest of female accusers. One is restraining order abuse, the act of requesting an unmerited restraining order against an individual, and in some cases the misuse of that order for any sort of harassment, malicious mischief against the subject, or personal gain for the holder, rather than its intended purpose of protection. Another is malicious prosecution, the act of commencing a civil or criminal proceeding against an individual without probable cause and for a purpose other than that of bringing the alleged offender to justice. Both behaviors are facilitated by a combination of stipulations in the Violence Against Women Act and social attitudes impacting authority responses to complaints made by female accusers. These, when combined with mandates that authorities automatically attribute credibility to female accusers, lead to false arrest, wrongful conviction, and wrongful sentencing, and even in the absence of criminal conviction, transfer of property from accused to accuser, and the accused suffering loss or prohibition of child custody. Douglas and Hines noted this use of false accusations as a tool in custody battles. According to their report, within the judicial system, some men who sustained IPV reported experiencing gender stereotype treatment. Even with apparent corroborating evidence that their female partners were violent and that the help seekers were not, they reportedly lost custody of their children, were blocked from seeing their children, and were falsely accused by their partners of IPV and abusing their children. According to some, the burden of proof for male IPV victims may be especially high. This culpability gap extends throughout the entire process. Intimate partner and sexual violence cases have, as a unique characteristic, a practice of exempting from criminal culpability female accusers who commit certain crimes in their pursuit of a conviction of a male defendant. Filing false criminal complaints, lying to police during investigations, perjuring themselves, acting in contempt of court, and any criminal abuse they engage in directly against the accused and his witnesses, such as stalking or harassment. These exemptions do not extend to male accusers when the defendant is female. This gap manifests in odd corruptions where criminal law intersects with divorce and custody battles, wherein imposing expectations of good character and responsible parenting may actually be viewed by the court as a form of abuse. A father can be treated as an aggressor in court for reporting a mother's exposure of the couple's children to conditions that would have led to removal of children from the home by Child Protective Services had the state discovered them independently of the custody dispute. The combination of misplaced inculpation of men and wrongful exemption for women has led to a phenomenon of men being subjected to tangled, protracted ordeals of malicious prosecution, sometimes lasting several years, as the mothers of their children abuse the criminal court system as the dirty bomb of custody battles, often dramatically and permanently impacting not only their target, the children's father, but his close friends and family, and ultimately the children themselves, and usually with legal impunity for the attacking mother. Criminal law supposedly exists to establish and enforce a fair and just balance between the individual's personal liberty and personal boundaries, and the liberty and boundaries of his neighbors, and the ability of the population within a society to manage risks and needs which occur specifically because of our choice to live in communities. These are human rights considerations. Arbitration of them is impacted by government authority considerations. The enforcement system is expected to deal fairly between citizens when there is a conflict or an infringement. Instead, it establishes and enforces a gross, cumbersome double standard in accountability and human rights considerations. This brings back some of the same uncomfortable questions we asked last week, which bear repeating, along with a few new ones. Once again, are we as a society responding to criminal offense in the most productive way we can, or are we using the criminal justice system as a vehicle for the perpetuation of our species' tribalism? Do we value women so much more than everyone else that we are willing to accept the sacrifice of whole families' welfare to satisfy the interests of the female side of a conflicted couple? Or, once again, does society think women less possessed than men are of the self-control necessary to keep their behavior within the bounds of the law? Isn't having less culpability an indication of less capability? And wouldn't that indicate justification for restricting women's freedoms as one would those of children in order to prevent serious life-impacting errors? How does that fit in with human rights considerations? If we do not want to go back to treating women like privileged children under the law, perhaps we should move in the opposite direction. Degender all areas of law, and limit government mediation of custody and property disputes in divorce cases to instances where no agreement can be reached, or the usual enforcement is merited after a contract is signed and then violated. Why should we expect government entities to be the primary arbiter of citizens' welfare or interests, and more? Why should consideration for one sex's welfare and interests take precedence over that of the other? After all, isn't an imbalance in human rights considerations evidence of an imbalanced outlook on humanity? Isn't a gender-based exemption from capable adult standards for accountability and obligation evidence of a gender-based imbalance in expected competence as a mature adult? And in light of that, why aren't more women viewing the existing gap as an attack on both men's human rights and the perception of women's acumen and fortitude? Where is the massive female protest against this egregious set of prejudices? Oh, wait. They were busy protesting for government handouts and defamation of the male gender as deadbeats, abusers, and predators because they were traumatized by an accurate statement on gold diggers. That kind of gives the pussy hat a whole other connotation, doesn't it? Hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 19, Crime and Punishment, Son of Accountability Gap. Just a reminder, if you want to join in the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Livestream channel. If YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch. And if you want to help us become immune to the authoritative censorship of YouTube and other platforms, consider becoming a patron at feedthebadger.com. After all, a big mouth's got to be fed, right? I'm here tonight with the Woozle Slayer, Karen Strawn, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to continue last week's discussion on the gender gap and accountability in criminal justice outcomes. This week, we're going to begin with the stark difference in authority response to criminal partner abuse complaints and women's impunity in relation to crimes committed to promote legal action on false allegations. I'm going to throw this to my co-hosts, my cohorts, yes, we're bad, with a reiteration of a question from the intro. Does this indicate that we as a society value women so much more than everyone else, that we're willing to accept the sacrifice of whole families' welfare to satisfy the interests of the female side of a conflicted couple? What do you think, Alice?
I would have to say that, yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a case, it was a particularly egregious case that came to light in Australia, I believe, a few years ago that, excuse my voice, I'm still getting over the flu, it involved a particularly combative mother who was engaging in like an extreme parental alienation of the children, and the judge had repeatedly ordered her to comply with the court-ordered access, visitation, parenting time that the father was entitled to, and all she did was just ignore, and then she would just be hauled into court and told yet again, obey the court order, and she would just ignore it. And she was never actually given even a slap on the wrist. She was just repeatedly told, just do it. And then finally, the situation was so bad that the judge permanently severed the father's parental rights, and wrote a letter that would be and ordered that letter be opened by the children when they turned 14 or something like that, explaining the situation and explaining that their father was not like this horrible abuser or anything else, that they had been, explaining the situation to these kids, because he said essentially, there's no way to make this mother comply, right? My hands are tied. I can't make her comply. She's in continual contempt of court. There's nothing I can do, right? Because there's no punishments available to me for contempt of court. There's no penalties I could impose on this woman for contempt of court. So instead, I'm going to sever this man's parental rights permanently and write an explanatory letter for these kids to read when they're 18 or 14. explaining the situation. Like this is how ridiculous it has gotten. And again, I'm going to bring up that one article that I read on the National Organization for Men Against Sexism website, which is a feminist website, that essentially said that if the mother doesn't want you to have custody, the very act of you fighting for custody is an abusive act. You're actually abusing your ex-partner by fighting for custody. That's an act of domestic violence, right? So don't do it. If she doesn't want you to have custody, just go along with it. That's the only way you can go if you don't want to be an abuser, right? So I mean, like, things are so fucked up. And when I look at, you know, some of these situations in the US where you have kids that are, you know, you have a father who's in the middle of a custody battle with the mother. You know, he's sort of, or maybe not a custody battle, but he's in and out of court, trying to have his parental rights enforced, his visitation rights enforced. He's a fit parent. He's been deemed fit by the court. And the kids are removed from the mother's custody by Child Protective Services. And they have a perfectly fit father there saying, I'll take them. And what does the state do? It puts these kids in foster care. And maybe it'll give the dad the opportunity to apply to get the kids if he goes through this lengthy, you know, lengthy parenting courses and passes all these tests and jumps through all these hoops to prove that he's fit, right? Which is absolutely absurd. He's the biological fucking father of the kids.
Well, if that was ever done to a mother, it would be considered just the most egregious breach of human rights ever. Not to mention completely disgusting and unhealthy for the children. Like, what does that got to feel like? Being told that it would be better for you to go into foster care than to go with your own father. That's pretty messed up, if you ask me.
Well, I think too, I mean, the idea, and this is something that comes up, and it's sort of one of these things that, just because there was an issue with sort of trial by therapy, recovered memory therapy article at skeptic.com magazine that I read earlier. And one of the problems I think that gets overlooked in these kinds of recovered memory, false memory is what it should be called, yes. Issues. When you have, there's two victims here. Well, there's a whole bunch of victims, but there's two victims in these cases, right? It's the father usually who is being falsely accused of molestation or egregious abuse or whatever, right? And has to, you know, go through hell to prove his innocence or ends up in prison. And then there is the daughter or son or, you know, student or whoever, right? Foster child, whoever, who then goes through this process of, I mean, because if I, you know, I really love my dad. I really, really, really love my dad. I adore him. He's just the most, and he was just unbelievably wonderful all through my childhood. He was like the greatest dad. He was the perfect dad for me. And maybe another person, a different kid, wouldn't have felt that way, but he was the perfect dad for me. And so if somebody were to tell me now that he was a serial rapist and convinced me that that was true, right? That would be in itself a trauma. That would be excruciatingly traumatic for me to actually have to come to terms with the fact that my dad actually was, you know, he's a horrible person, right? He did horrible things. That this man who I, you know, adored and idolized and looked up to all my life and admired, right? And loved and felt safe with, and all of that was this horrible, horrible monster, right? And so when you look at some of these people who have gone through this recovered memory therapy, and they are convinced wrongly that that they are the victims of some egregious form of childhood abuse by one of their parents, you know, like, so there's plenty of fucking blame to go around in all of these situations, and there are more victims than I think that we are willing to necessarily acknowledge, because I think that anybody who has been convinced that they were abused when they were not, they are also a victim of that situation, right? So I mean, like, and the therapists, right? They're not really facing a whole lot. I thought recovered memory therapy was all done with after McMartin, but or after the fallout from McMartin, but no, apparently it was alive and well and kicking in 2011. So, like, I just, this entire and the account, like, it always seems to be, it's men who get thrown under the bus, right? And the collateral damage to everybody, you know, including children, is just, that's immaterial, right? That's immaterial.
Yeah, it's terrible, and I don't really understand the drive to try and get these children to remember these messed up memories that they never dealt with. I've read so many stories of
money.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Money is behind it. That's what drove the Sandusky case. It looks like it was from the book that has come out, and there's an article that was just released by a skeptic blog evaluating this book, and it looks like everything in the Sandusky case was based on those so-called recovered memories. And
yeah, the only other thing, the only other piece of testimony or evidence in that case that was not based on questionable or questionable testimony, like that the person was, you know, intentionally lying, or that the person was had been subjected to recovered memory therapy, and all of them having a financial stake in it because they were all launching a class action suit. Was the only other piece of testimony was hearsay evidence.
Right.
Oh, one janitor heard another janitor, you know, said another janitor told him, and the other janitor was asked by police. Well, he was senile at the time of the trial, but when the police came knocking on his door and said, "Who was the guy that you said that you believe you saw in the showers 10 years ago? You know, was it Jerry Sandusky?" And he said, "Oh God, absolutely not."
All right, so I'm getting reports that my mic is too quiet. How does it sound now? Is it any better to just get the chat to pipe up? Are you guys able to hear me all right on Discord?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little quiet compared to Karen, but not by much to me.
Well, let me see if I can. For some reason, every couple of days, my computer decides to fuck up all of my sound and everything because I use a headset.
Are you sure that's not your husband?
He doesn't use this computer, first of all, and second of all, he's far more competent with this stuff than I am. Not that I'm incompetent, but it's just annoying as all get out to have, like, I set up my settings, this is the way I want it to work. The mic that it's trying to switch to is actually disabled, so it's not like it's getting anything out of this. But yeah, so then I have, like, OBS decided it didn't want to use the mic now. It's just like, what the fuck? So yeah,
all technology is against you.
Well, what it is like it doesn't like women in technology, so it's like, well, you're a girl, we don't have to listen to what you say, so every time you set up your settings, we're gonna undo them, because yeah. Anyway,
it's just because all women are being seen as not having responsibility, right? So it's right. Clearly it knows better than you do. It knows better. Yeah, you ought to have.
I have a male feminist computer. That's what it is.
Oh, there you go.
It's going to decide for me the volume of my sound. But I'm gonna go through here now that my sound is corrected, and see if I have to correct my computer again. And I'm gonna read some super chats. I have some that I think were sent out just to get me to read something odd. But we'll start with the first one. Zomara0292 gave us $2 US and said the last one for the month, Karen, is waifu. Field O'Bears gave us $5 and said treating women as if they have potency is misogynies.
It is.
Yeah. Wise Mage, I think that's a 0, gave us $2 Canadian and said, let me bust a fat nut on Hannah's chest. I don't know. I think my chest is too soft for nuts. It depends on whether it's a walnut or a peanut. I'm horrible. Yes, I knew what you meant by that. I'm just being an ass. Duck, formerly known as Censor, gave us $5 Australian and said, government, get out! Ree! French honey and well, you know, in this instance, a government hasn't been doing very good. French honey badger gave us $10 and said, what if they don't give the child to the father to make sure he can't claim that he built up a relationship with the child that would bolster his case for custody? Well, that's actually something I would say is a very astute observation and serious consideration, because a lot of times when Child Protective Services takes a child out of somebody's home, their next step is to, you know, like they put the child in foster care and then they start working towards selling the child through the adoption system to another family. And you can't do that if there's a dad waiting to take custody. So they try to cut the dad out, try to cut the grandparents out, you know, and caseworkers will tell you they do everything they can to put the child with family. It's not true, because I've watched them do the opposite. And I've watched them do the opposite when there are caring, competent family members who have their own children, who have custody of their own children, their own good financial situation, so they would not have any problem taking care of another child. So that's a distinct possibility. And part of it is because of the child support thing. They can get both parents to pay child support if they got the kids in foster care. But part of it is because they do have incentives to place children through adoption.
Yeah, I will say in Canada it's not quite like that. They do go out of their way to find family to place the child with, and I know this because, you know, I know that like my ex has yet another child after our divorce, and she's I think 5 or 6 now, and she is in the custody of her grandparents, and like the mother was just completely unfit, and the child was taken away by Child Protective Services, taken into care, and then placed immediately with the grandparents. And I kind of looked at that a little bit askance, because it's like, okay, well, they did such a good job with the mother, raising the mother of this child, like, let's put another child in their care. But they do have, the grandparents are extremely good about essentially allowing my ex to have, essentially 50-50 time or more with his daughter. So he has her a lot of the time, and that's probably the only reason I'm not mad at him for not moving closer to where we live, is that he has this other child and she needs him more than my kids do at the moment. But yeah, the services, at least in all the provinces other than Ontario, I couldn't speak for Ontario because Ontario's particularly egregious in terms of family law and stuff like that. But in most of the other provinces, they will go out of their way to look for family, including a 19-year-old older brother, or like a 20-year-old older brother. They would rather place, a child in that person's custody than in the custody of strangers, if possible. So,
and I think that would be a better approach here in the United States too. But because the federal government has set up financial incentives for just exactly the wrong decision, and in a lot of cases, what we end up with is, instead of considering the welfare of the child first and the mechanics of the system second, our caseworkers here consider the mechanics of the system first and the welfare of the child last. And then I don't know if their training sucks, or if they like have to take a common sense type IQ test and flunk it to get their jobs, or what. But I have seen some really like dumb things said. Like I had a neighbor who had a child who was not enrolled in kindergarten yet, but she was 5 years old. And other kids in the neighborhood who were 5 years old, and even some who were 4, were enrolled in the kindergarten. It was the beginning of the school year. Some kids enroll as young as 4 years old and then turn 5 in the first month or two. And then there's other kids that turn 7 at the end of the school year. So there's an age range in there that's quite a variety. And they walked to school back then in groups of kids, with older siblings and younger siblings walking together, kids from one home walking with kids from other homes, and there were not necessarily parents walking the children to school. It was 4 blocks away from the school, a small town, and that's the way the kids walked to school for years. And there was never any problem with it. Nobody ever had, we never had any situation where there was, a stranger around and the kids panicked or anything like that. The worst thing that came out of it was, like I said, in my neighborhood when I was growing up, we used to schedule fights at the park on the way home from school. I'm gonna kick your butt at 3:30 at the park on the way home. You better be there. Everybody's gonna think you're a chicken, And then you'd have your fight, and then it would be over. But this girl wasn't enrolled. She walked to school with the other 5-year-olds and went into kindergarten and sat down in an empty seat, and the teacher's like, you're not supposed to be here. Well, the moment that the mother had discovered she was not in the house, which was like right after she came out of the bathroom. She goes into the bathroom, daughter's watching TV. She comes out of the bathroom, daughter's not watching TV. She runs around the house, calls her, daughter's not anywhere in the house. By the time she went outside, daughter was all the way down past the park, which was on the next block, walking with the other kids to school, including her brother, who kept telling her to go home, and so on. And so by the time the child was found, the principal was bringing her back from the school. And he handed her over to me because she recognized me. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know anything about me. I had said I was not her mother, but a neighbor, and that her mother was looking for her. And it's such a trusting small town that he didn't have any problem with that. But then he turned around and went back to the school and called Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services investigates the household, finds absolutely nothing wrong. And I know because my parents were over there. They weren't going to let this young lady go through this alone. And so they're watching this agent that showed up, this CPS caseworker shows up in baggy sweatpants and a dirty t-shirt to examine the house. Very professional. Very professional, yeah. And then she proceeded to tell the mother to lock the child in the house at all times. Like, not even allow her to go out as normal for a 5-year-old and play in the yard. She couldn't talk to the child about not doing this again and apply a penalty. You're going to be sitting in a corner for 10 minutes, or you're on timeout. You're losing television privileges this afternoon, whatever, because you didn't tell mommy where you were going, and that's very dangerous. She couldn't do any of those things with this obviously intelligent 5-year-old who was just desperate to learn to read. No, lock all the doors. And hope to God there's not a fire, and if there is, mom doesn't pass out from smoke inhalation before the child gets out of the house, because she's a dead kid then. That's much safer than teaching the child the right way to behave. And that's Child Protective Services in the United States in a nutshell. And I've seen them. It's
ridiculous.
I've seen them do that kind of shit all the time.
Yeah, well, I've heard more and more stories about that, and when I was a kid, I used to walk clear across the neighborhood to get to school, and there was never any problem with it. When I went to high school, clear across town, we made it a tradition that we would walk home clear across town at least once a year, and there was never any problems with it. But I hear stories about these kids not even being allowed to play out in their front yards without people calling Child Protective Services on them. I thought we were already struggling from enough people who are special snowflakes now. What is this going to do to the next generation of children?
Yeah,
it's actually
the stupidest thing.
There was a couple that were investigated by Child Protective Services. I forget where it was. It was either in Eastern Canada or in the Eastern United States. Because their 10-year-old and they allowed their 10-year-old and 6-year-old to walk 1 kilometer and to the park to play and then walk home. And nothing happened, right? And I'm looking at it like, okay, so when I was a kid, my mom would like make me some sandwiches, fill my dad's old army canteen, his World War II army canteen with water and ice cubes, and stick them in a backpack for me in the morning and in the summer during summer holidays. And so I'd be out the door at 8:30 in the morning on my bike with my friend Darren, and she'd be like, "Come home when the street lights come on." You know, and if I wasn't home half an hour after the street lights came on, then she'd start to worry, right? And it's like, so I mean, she wasn't expecting me home for lunch. Like I was gone for like, you know, sometimes like 14 hours, right? Yeah. All by myself at age 10 with my friend. She didn't worry. And you know, it's just like, it's absolutely crazy that kids have so little unsupervised time these days, and a lot of that has to do with sort of this. It is part of it has to do with the feminizing of an embracing of feminine values within, and I think that has a lot to do with just the general transference of power, and part of that is this sort of accountability gap, right? The hammer that women have at their disposal to bash men with and just destroy them, right? That gives women much more leverage even within an intact marriage to determine how these kids are going to be raised. And so you have usually you have two parents. Generally the mother is the I want to keep an eye on them all the time kind of parent, and usually the father is the, go skin your knees and catch some frogs kind of parent. And you have this pulling in toward the mother's breast, I guess, of the children. And then she bubble wraps them and bubble wraps them to herself. Right. And all of the activities the kid is into, is engaging in are supervised activities. They're structured activities. They're organized activities. They are, activities that are meant for, learning or, skill building or whatever, right? As opposed to just going and climbing trees or doing a like, oh, there's a dead body in the woods, right? Let's go find it or whatever, right? All of these, let's build a fort in the vacant lot with the construction waste, things like that. So, but this is pulling kids ever more towards a solely maternal supervision style, right? And then that also is the same in schools, right? Because schools are so frequently just absolutely dominated by women up until the 6th grade, at least. In middle school, it starts to even out a little bit. And in high school, it's almost 50-50, right? But you have this very, very feminine, and it's because they have power. It's because women have power within the school system because they're the majority of teachers. Women have power as parents because they know that they can take those kids away from dad if they want to. They know they have that leverage. And even if they don't think of themselves as somebody who would do that, they still know they have the leverage. They still know that they are the primary parent, and they have the say.
And before we were asking the question whether we're using the justice system, massive finger quotes, to further the ends of women, even at the expense of children, and not to mention everybody else. But this is a clear example of that. Like when I was a kid, people who have been watching for a while know that I had an abusive stepmother, physically and emotionally abusive, and I did as much as I possibly could to get out of the house and be away from her, pretty much anywhere. Like I could be at a bingo hall and it would be more pleasant than being near my stepmother. But to think that somebody these days could have
that you're locked, that that the child services could have essentially laid down the law and said, yeah, you are now on a lockdown 24/7 with this
person. Yes, exactly. And it just to think about that, it just makes me shudder. I wanted to get away from her, and I knew what I was doing in trying to get away from her. So for them to say, "Oh no, we know best. Your stepmother knows best. What's best for you." Like, the thought is just absolutely horrifying to me.
You know, I had exactly the opposite. I mean, I had conflict with my mom when I was a teenager because I was an asshole. That's the truth.
Aren't
that's just
we
what
all?
I was. I was a messed up asshole. I had roid rage, but as a kid, like, we lived. The town that I grew up in was on the Miami-Erie Canal system, and there was the tow path that they used to tow the canal boats along, and so you could see, like, the canal bed, and there was a whole bunch. It was surrounded by, you know, foliage, and you could see little animals and all kinds of stuff. And we used to go walking along there, and when I was old enough to wander that far away from the house without mom, you know, being around to make sure I didn't get myself killed, and which is funny because the times that I did almost get myself killed, I was, like, within sight of the kitchen windows. But anyway, we had watches. We were told what time to come home, and then mom would want to hear all about what we saw and what we found, and you know, what a good time we had exploring the towpath and everything. And it was a bonding thing. You went out and had a good time. Tell me all about it, you know. We'd get on our bicycles and ride across town to the local swimming pool. And, you know, we'd go swimming for like 5 hours and come home on our bicycles. And mom would ask what we had done, had we had a good time and everything. And she sent money with us for food. And because of the way we were raised to handle our appetites, we ignored the pool food, got stamped out, rode our bikes to the local grocery store and got stuff and made sandwiches before we went back into the pool. So, like, we rode all over town at junior high age, you know, and nobody would have said boo because of partly whose kids it was, and they all knew that my parents had taught us to take care of ourselves and we were not in any danger. And I mean, you know, what kids turn down things like nachos and candy and potato chips and pop to go get sandwich, lunch meat, and milk and cheese. But that's what we did. And it's like, if Child Protective Services had witnessed, say, the boxing ring in the backyard, the neighborhood boxing ring in the backyard, those snowflakes would have freaked the fuck out and taken all of the kids in the neighborhood from all of the parents in the neighborhood. And that was like, they never would have better
outcome.
Oh yeah, like we never would have won the state championship in football when the guys got older, because they wouldn't have been so tough, you know. So they wouldn't have had that experience. None of them that got football scholarships would have gotten, you know. I mean, they might have. Some of them were pretty good players, and they had an awesome coach, just an amazing coach. But you know, if he wasn't allowed to instill toughness in them the way that he did, because his coaching methods were rough. You weren't allowed to have long hair. He'd cut it off right there on the football field, because he didn't want somebody else to get a hold of your hair and drag you down by the neck. And you know, he was a tough coach. Then the students, like, today, they would complain. And parents would be like, oh yeah, you don't have to deal with a coach that tough. You can quit football. Or they would complain to the school and stuff like that. The way kids are raised today is entirely different. And it is creating a problem of not necessarily kids that are wimps, but kids that don't know how to engage their own toughness. Kids that don't know how to tough things out. They could. They have the capability. They just don't know. They don't have the knowledge. And that's a real shame, because that toughness is necessary for achievement. And achievement,
Well,
the ability to engage your capacity for achievement, is necessary to reach your income potential. So having the things that you want as an adult is predicated on learning as a child to tough things out. If we take that away from kids, we're going to increase poverty a lot.
Well, and when I look at the way my mom was, because I do remember one incident when me and my buddy, my partner in crime, my regular partner in crime, Darren, when we got into serious trouble, my mom actually spanked us both over this, and it was because we had these plastic. I think we were like 7 or something like that, with these plastic sports toys, like a plastic hollow baseball bat and a plastic hollow golf club, and we were out in the backyard goofing around, and we decided we were going to bat and golf the apples, the ripe apples off of the 2 apple trees, right? And my mom was a big gardener, and she and a baker, and she would make preserves and all of this, right? So, dog, would you stop? So she would, these apples, they're almost ready for picking. And here we are, like, she's looking out the kitchen window, and she's like, what the hell are those kids doing? What the fuck? Right? And she comes marching out there, because we've got already about 30 or 40 of the apples, bang, off the trees onto the ground, right? And she just like lays 2 swats on each of our butts, right? And tells us to whack each other if we need to swing those things so much, right? So then we just started whacking each other. And, it was just like, I don't understand how, and even the whole idea, I don't think either of us even cried when she swatted our butts, right? It's like, okay, that's where she's putting her foot down. Like, the swat on the butt it's not even meant to hurt necessarily. It's just a way of essentially drawing the line. This is the line that will not be crossed again, right? And so, it wasn't like neither of us felt like we didn't feel traumatized or abused. We just kind of looked at each other, and then started whacking each other with these toys, right? But no, it's like there is no toughness. There is no and one of the horrible things about this way that we're doing things, and you see this in single mother households, and single mother households are a direct consequence of privileging mothers over fathers legally, and ensuring that when women abuse the process, whether that's the domestic violence process or the family law process, right? When they abuse that, they face no consequences, right? So a lot of the custody arrangements right now, and you can say, and feminists will say, oh, well, only a tiny minority of cases even go to a judge and get decided on, and in those cases, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, and most of the cases are decided between the parties. Well, yeah, but any lawyer is going to tell you, okay, if it goes to the judge, you have no chance, right? If you're a man, right? He's going to say, if you go to a lawyer, you have no chance. You have almost zero chance, right? And it's going to cost you a ton of money, and you're probably going to lose anyway, right? So to act like that small minority of judgments of precedents has no bearing on what people decide in mediation is absolutely fucking retarded, right? So we have this entire system set up, right, that privileges mothers, and that actually leads to serious harms for children. Because one of the most interesting things that has been discovered recently in sort of the child psychological literature is that it's not giving empathy that teaches children how to empathize. It's not that kind of mother love that teaches children empathy. It is boundaries, and it is and the slightly more distant, right, the slightly less close relationship between fathers and children, where there are fewer boundaries, they're enforced more strictly, and the father actually is a little more distant and a little more, oh yeah, toughen up. Oh yeah, no, mind your head, right? My dad used to say, mind your head, bohunk, when I bonked my head. because my mom's Ukrainian, and he called us kids bohunk as an endearment because we were racist that way, I guess. And so essentially what you have is you're depriving these kids of the father influence, which is one of the primary paths to learning empathy that children have. And the other one, also due to this sort of focus on maternal styles of caregiving and parenting and teaching and rearing children, and schooling and all of that, we have an absence of free play in nature. And free play in nature with other kids, unsupervised, unstructured time with other kids is one of the primary ingredients that teaches children empathy. It teaches them that they are not the center of the universe, that there is not always going to be somebody to mediate every single conflict, some adult or authority figure, that there is not a process available on demand that they can abuse if they want to bully somebody, by essentially accusing them of doing something or tattling on them or whatever. So essentially, kids, when they are alone with other kids, they have to learn how to get along. They have to learn how to negotiate that social relationship with their direct peers. And they're deprived of the opportunity to learn those things right now, because there are very few situations other than in households like mine where I would be probably Child Protective Services would have considered me a negligent parent. Because, sometimes my kid left the house during summer holidays before I even got out of bed. He'd come home a couple hours later, drink some water from the tap, pee like a racehorse, and go back out. And I didn't know where he was going. Right? He was with his friends.
There was a time when that was normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it used to be normal, and you see like little memes about this, right, going around on Facebook about how we used to climb trees and drink straight from the garden hose and all that kind of stuff. And it's the more the older I get, the more that resonates with me. That we've gotten to this situation where households have become so feminized that kids are not allowed to experience the things that help them grow up anymore. I'm going to dive back into the super chats, and this is the weirdest one yet. And I will remind Karen that this is from Wige Maze Zero and not from me. Wige Maze Zero gave us $10 Canadian and says, "Karen, please out your next cigarette on my nipple and call me a limp-dicked sissy bitch. Thank you." This does not give you permission to call me a limp-dicked sissy bitch, because it's from Wise
All
Maze.
right, shut up, you limp-dicked sissy bitch.
Whatever.
There you go.
Okay, well, if that's how you really feel, Wise Mage, whatever. Is that what it was?
Wise Mage Zero.
Wise Mage Zero.
Wise Maze Zero. If that's really what you want, email me and we'll see if we can arrange to meet up at, I don't know if you're in Edmonton. But if you really want me to do that, it's probably going to cost you more than $10. So,
yeah. And then Joey Jojo gave us. Did I get back up? No. Okay. Joey Jojo gave us $2 and said bugged streaming mechanics. Yeah.
What else is new?
And if we really want to make it a sexy post, we could call it bugged damned streaming mechanics. But you guys will have to think about that one. Vulpine Eldritch gave us $2 US and says, update on the Calgary Expo lawsuit, please. The answer is we're in communications, and we really can't describe the communications. After the 15th, there should be more information, but before the 15th, this is really all we can say. And I know everybody's on the edge of their seats, and because we're in a holding pattern after not having to go the rest of the way with the trial. But we can't really say anything else.
We can say because we're in a holding pattern right now. But I will say the end of the trial has not happened. The trial is still open-ended. The trial is still ongoing, so it's temporarily adjourned, and it could be picked up at a later date if necessary, right? And that's not to say that we wasted trial days, because the judge himself acknowledged that this trial is going to take way more than 3 days. After we were a couple of days in, he was like, this is obviously going to take way more than 3 days, regardless of what we do. If the trial continues to a judgment, it's going to take numerous days. So just because of the complexity of the case and the amount of testimony that needs to be given. So, and the evidence that needs to be gone over. So essentially, that it's temporarily adjourned, and we can pick it up if necessary.
We have to.
If we have to.
If they decide they really want to go through all that. Yeah. And then lose.
Because they're not gonna win. They're not gonna win.
So that's my take on it. But I can't give you any actual information other than what Karen said. There's no other information. So
that's my take on it. And I was sitting in the courtroom the whole time.
Yeah.
So
me too.
And Prim was as well. And so essentially, like, there's no way they're gonna win.
And
no way.
Just for the record, if Allison was our moms, we would never have gotten away with anything ever. She's got the best bullshit sniffer and the best way of handling it. And I can't describe anything, but
evidence binder. Oh my God, that evidence binder was like 8 feet thick, and it had everything, right? Like, it was like she set about like to construct her testimony and the evidence that goes along with it, right, in such a way that to leave the other side zero wiggle room. There is zero wiggle room. There is not an opening. There is not a nothing. Yeah. I think that the harshest thing that the other side managed to say, right, through the whole almost 2 days of her giving direct testimony was, she was describing what Gamergate was, and then said that the FBI had essentially found nothing actionable after investigating it. Yeah, and he said, and the opposing lawyer, and I can say this because it's all in the public record. The opposing lawyer stood up and said, well, I have to wonder about a group that would be investigated by the FBI.
Yeah, if you're drawing the ire of the FBI, then maybe you're dealing with the wrong
maybe there's a problem. And it's like, because this isn't a case about people being lied about in the media or anything.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Like, she's literally laid out a case that she's been lied about in the media and been accused of all of this wrongdoing, that none of it is true. And he's like, well, if you're being investigated by the FBI, right, you're probably guilty. And it's like, what? Like I don't think the judge bought it. I don't think it made any impression on the judge at that point. We were far enough along that I think. Yeah, no, I think that the other side, they have no case. They know it. They have no evidence, and they know it. All they could possibly do is cross-examine, but I don't think that they actually have a case to present. Yeah, they have no witnesses to call.
The one guy looked like his soul had been sucked out through his nostrils. So
yep, it almost makes you sympathetic. But moving on from that.
Yes.
Gonna go on. Terry Bull gives us $15 and says, thanks for all you've done, bros. This question is probably a whole show in itself, but is there anything bros can do legally to prevent things like this before they have children? As far as legally, actually, there's the only thing that men have available to them is the putative father registry, and that is for if you get a girl pregnant and you're not married to her, that basically says to the state, if she gets pregnant, it might be mine. And it's a double-edged sword, because that can get you slapped with child support for a kid that's not yours, and then you have to fight, to get out of that. But it does give you some protection against having your child's mother give birth without your knowledge to your child, and then run off and have the child adopted by somebody. So, but as far as the rest of this, there isn't at this point a protection against this. There needs to be legal reform.
Well, one of the things that is so frustrating, and it's like, it's one of those things that comes up always when, feminists bring up the, only 2 to 8% of, sexual assault allegations are false, right? And what they, and I say this every fucking time, stop lying. Even if you're not lying about the numbers, you're presenting them as an only number, only 2 to 8%, when you should be portraying them as at least 2%, right? Saying only 2 to 8% are false is like me saying only 6% are true, because that's the percentage of rape reports that are made to police that end in a conviction, right, in a court of law. So, they are saying that these cases, and one of the things that's absolutely hilarious is there was a study that was done. It was by the Making a Difference project, MAD, Making a Difference. And there's a blog called Data Gone Odd that put up a couple of blog posts on how to lie and mislead with rape statistics. And they went through this organization recruited police agencies to participate in this study. I think they chose 8 of them. They subjected all of the investigating officers to special training. And so 3 days of special training on how to properly investigate rape complaints. And part of the training involved telling these officers that any questioning of the victim's story, any kind of doubt or anything, could be traumatizing, could be devastating to the victim. So if you express any doubt or whatever, you could be actually traumatizing a rape victim. They caution that you should not repeat questions. So if the question has been asked and answered, don't ask it again, because, and they said specifically because it could lead to inconsistencies. They could give a different answer the second time you ask, and you don't want that. Okay. And basically that the training said that there's really no mandate to prosecute women who lie about rape. And so taking a claim that you feel is dubious, taking a complaint that you feel is unfounded, probably false, right, and investigating it in the direction of trying to determine that it is false, right, that's a waste of police time. So don't waste your time with that, right? And that only cases that can be determined to what you would consider a criminal court standard to be false can be actually designated as false, right? So essentially they set it up so that they train these cops to avoid detecting false cases, to avoid pursuing false cases when they have detected them, to determine that they are false, and set this egregiously high standard on a police agency in terms of determining whether a case is false, right? For the purposes of, of police recording, not prosecuting a woman, but just designating a case. Yeah, this case we believe is false as police officers, right? And that any investigation into whether the case is actually false, right, is going to potentially psychologically devastate a victim. Okay, so everything is warning these cops away, and essentially what they're saying is only if ironclad 100% bulletproof evidence of falseness lands in your fucking lap out of the fucking sky, okay, only then can you designate any case false. And they still found that I think 7 or 8% of cases were false. Okay. Now, given those parameters, it's amazing to me, and it's actually quite disturbing to me that the number of false cases, the percentage of cases they determined were false, was that high.
Yeah, that is very disturbing.
And here's the thing that gets me too, right? Because this is like a serious fucking thing. I mean, like, I think everybody thinks that, okay, so if somebody broke into a fucking Walmart, right, and stole $1,000 worth of merchandise, right, it would be no real big deal to Walmart. I mean, they have insurance for that. They, you know, like it's not, and they're worth billions of dollars. Right. So, I mean, it's not that big a deal to Walmart. So, I mean, like, people would think, well, that's not such a bad thing. Right. But if Walmart went to their insurance company and too often, right, and said, oh, you know, we were burglarized again. Right. And the insurance company had some suspicion that maybe this was an insurance scam. Maybe this was a lie for profit or for some other reason. Or maybe it was an inside job done by one of the employees or supervisors or something like that. The insurance company would investigate so that they wouldn't have to pay out that $1,000, right? They would literally pay somebody to investigate to make sure that that wasn't a false claim, right? You get in a car accident, your car gets stolen, right? If there's any suspicion that you might be not 100% on the up and up, they're going to investigate you. I have my sister's ex-husband had a car accident where he was injured. He got a closed head injury, and it was not his fault. And the insurance company put a private investigator on him to follow him around for 3 years while they determined whether his claim was, you know, worth paying out on. Right? Whether they were liable for that, whether they actually had to pay that money. And this insurance company is worth billions of dollars, right? And they're looking at, you know, this guy, he might want $100,000 or something like that for the head injury that led to a ongoing disability, right? Well, we're going to put somebody on him 24/7 to make sure he's not out shoveling his snow or not, you know, working or not, you know, doing different things, right, that he says he's not able to do, right? We're going to investigate that, right? So, I mean, like, insurance companies invested, you know, in the bar that I just bought 2 months ago burned down, right? And yeah, I want the insurance money for that. Oh, they'll investigate that. They'll fucking investigate the shit out of that, right? Because they know that you have something to gain, right? And yet, everybody in the fucking system knows that a woman who makes a complaint of domestic violence or sexual assault against her husband during a custody battle, she has something to gain. What she has to gain is the primary assets of the marriage. And the primary asset, the number one primary asset, is the children. The second primary asset is the house, right? Which is the children's residence, which she will get if she gets the children, right? Everybody knows that she has something to gain by lying, right? And nobody wants to investigate it. Nobody's looking to see if she's defrauding the system. Nobody fucking gives, like, they'll fucking do it over a $7,000 fucking vehicle that you claim was stolen. They'll look into you. They'll try and figure out whether you fucking drove it out into the middle of nowhere, ditched it, and freaking claimed that it was stolen so you could have replacement value. They'll do that. Yeah, you know, like, it's absurd. It's like insane to me, right? That there is no will there is no will on the part of police. There is no will on the part of prosecutors. There is no will on the part of the public and the politicians to press for this, to press for some kind of determination that when a woman is lying, I mean, because you even have women that we know were lying.
There is a will among the police.
Hofstra, we knew.
This is something,
she was
Karen,
lying.
Karen, this is something that is important.
Counseling.
This is important. There is a will among the police, okay? The cops hate being lied to, and they hate having people come in and pull their chains. They want to protect the public from actual criminals. They want to pursue actual crime cases and not lies. And when someone comes in and falsely reports a crime, and they go through and they have to deal with all of the ins and outs of an investigation, and all of the paperwork, and all of the footwork, and all of the time spent, and all of the emotional labor of dealing with somebody who is faking being traumatized, that takes a lot out of them. They hate that, and I would hate that as well. You know, if that happened in my job. But the cops that had to deal with the vexatious litigant in the 7 years in hell case, the vast majority of them went through a process of starting out gung-ho, we're going to get this guy for hurting you. How dare somebody beat on this poor innocent woman? You know, how dare somebody harass and sexually assault this poor innocent woman? And as it goes forward, they figure out that she's pulling their chain, and they've wasted all these man hours and all of this emotional input and all of this intellectual input on nothing. And they've basically, they're not going to achieve protection of anybody, and they're not going to get a criminal because there's no criminal involved on the end that they're allowed to deal with. But they got a leash on them. They can't go after her for lying. The state doesn't want them to. The federal government doesn't want them to. The court won't listen if they do. The DA doesn't want. It has to be an absolute cut and dried case, and it has to be as egregious as this. But beyond the point where this one hit, where it was like the impact. You know, if she cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, they'd go after her. But because she didn't, she just cost a guy's sanity. They didn't. They couldn't go after her. So there are cops that all they consider is conviction, but there are a lot of good cops out there that just fucking hate having their chain pulled like that.
I know, but I have to wonder, even with those cops, right? Like if they know that there is no way that they can hold one party responsible, right? That there is going to be no resolution, right? Where one party is actually going to be held responsible because the woman is never going to be held responsible. Maybe that might actually compel them to continue to try to find. I'm going to continue to try to look for that smoking gun, that one freaking fingerprint or whatever, right, that proves that this guy is guilty, because there's nothing else I'm able to do with this case.
Well, what we saw in that case was there were two different reactions from cops. We had the majority of them were like, once they started to figure out that this was a serial liar, they stopped listening to her. And that was because they had, this is, you know, the Dayton metro area is not, it's not New York, it's not LA, it's not Chicago, but we have a crime rate. We have murder, we have actual rape, we have actual domestic violence. There's a lot of domestic violence, and a lot of it's two-way, and a lot of times they end up having to go to situations where they're in danger because the minute they walk in the house, they have both sides of a conflict attacking them for being there. There's a lot of this is the opiate capital of the United States. I live in the opiate capital of the United States. That's what a dubious honor, right? So they're dealing with drug crime. They're dealing with people that have gone nuts because they're on drugs, and then they got this, you know, cunt coming in. Oh, this guy did this thing to me that he didn't actually do, and it just, they don't have time for that, and so most of them moved on to other cases. Most of them, the department stopped responding to her calls. With one female detective in the City of Dayton Police Department that followed VAWA prescribed protocol to the letter. And in doing so, she dragged him down to the Dayton Police Department repeatedly to answer for every little change in the liar's story. And some of those changes were big, and some of them made the story impossible. And she was still...
Reminds me of Mary Kellett.
Right.
Right?
But that was
one
one out of dozens of cops in 4 different police precincts in 4 different municipalities in 2 different counties. So it's not a majority of cops that want to go after people who didn't do anything wrong. It's a majority of cops that get fed up with stuff like this, and their hands are tied.
Yeah, I know they are, because prosecutors won't do it. Prosecutors won't follow up. I do have to say, though, that you remember the you must have read what's his name?
The Kellett case, about Vladik Filler.
No, not that. That it does remind me of Mary Kellett and Vladik Filler, but Greer's archaeological investigation into Susan Brown Miller's 2% false rate statistic,
and
right?
it was a detective that said in their experience that only 2% of
well, no, it was that a specific precinct in New York City, in a specific I guess district of New York City, after they had brought in all female sexual assault investigators, found that only 2% could be classified as false.
And that was probably the same type of methodology where it has to be proved beyond a shadow of a doubt to be false before you can call it false. And under circumstances that prevent you from proving it's false, unless it's really blatant.
And it's absolutely what I find hilarious, and like I think everybody here should also be following Diana Davison, and should actually go look at. She did a panel discussion through Cafe with Andre Marin, who actually publicly lied in a news article about the nature of Bill C-51, 2017. He essentially lied about the nature of the changes and what those would actually enact publicly as a lawyer, which is really egregious. But she sat down with him and another lawyer who actually was reasonable and sensible, and did a panel discussion on Bill C-51 and the implications of it. And what she's been looking into has been because there was another bill, and it was actually quite quiet in Canada, and it was passed. It was fast-tracked through the Parliament and passed unanimously. It was a unanimous vote. All parties voted in favor of it. It was proposed by Rona Ambrose, who was leader of the Conservative Party at the time, it was her last big thing. It was her last big hurrah, and then she announced she was probably going to be stepping down from politics after this term. But it was to essentially make sexual assault sensitivity training mandatory for anybody who wanted to be a judge, who was a candidate for the bench. Before they could be appointed to the bench, they would have to go through this training. Right. And when you look at some of the stuff that Diana has pulled up in terms of the Robin Camp case, Robin Camp was a judge who was disbarred. He wasn't disbarred. He's actually fighting to keep his lawyer's license, his license to practice law. But he resigned from the bench the afternoon he was going to be fired, essentially. After an inquiry found that he had violated these sort of rules of sensitivity around sexual assault victims, right? But when you look at the kind of training that they're going to be subjecting these judges to, it doesn't matter what the victim does, right? I mean, you start off essentially naming that person as a victim, not a complainant. And it doesn't matter what the victim does, right? If she withdraws into her house, she's a victim. If she continues to seek a sexual relationship with the person, she's a victim. If she stalks the person and he rejects her repeatedly, that's no indication that he didn't sexually assault her. She might be just trying to reformulate the situation and recontextualize it into a non-traumatic thing in her mind by stalking him afterwards, right? Like, there is no behavior and no action up to and including lying on the stand that can be used to discredit this woman, to say that it's less likely that she was a victim of sexual assault, right? Like, every single behavior a woman could possibly engage in, including flashing her pussy at strangers in public and, shaving her armpits or not shaving them, or using an umbrella on a sunny day, right? All of these things are indicative that she's a rape victim. None of them are inconsistent with rape, right? And so it's like, this is what the training is going to do. So there are other changes that will essentially make it virtually impossible for a man to advance the defense of innocent but mistaken belief in consent. Like, that is off the table. All kinds of fucked up things. Right now in Canada, according to legal precedent, if I go to bed with my boyfriend and I say, I want you to kiss me awake in the morning, and he does that, he's sexually assaulted me by default, because the moment I fell asleep, my consent was legally vitiated.
God, that's ridiculous.
It is. It's insane. And it's a situation where, like I said, we've gotten to where we're starting to treat women like privileged children again. And if we're going to do that, we might as well do it all the way. Or we could go the other direction and get the government out of interpersonal relationships. And basically, if something would not be an assault, if people who were not in a relationship were involved in it, then there's no reason to consider it an assault just because you're in a relationship. But going on with the super chats, because we're getting behind on them again, we have Rob Kinchu gave us $15 and said Chumble Spuzz.
Thanks, Rob.
and Prim typed in the chat that you're a smartass. So
you are.
I will say this: it is always better to be a smartass than a dumbass. So that you always take being called a smartass as a compliment.
Very very true. It's a term of endearment.
There we go. And then Mark the Atheist gave us $2 and said, heads up that the streaming channel stream is down. I've been looking at it and it's definitely having hiccups. If you're having difficulty watching the stream on YouTube, go to Twitch, because we seem to have better success with Twitch not doing that. It doesn't seem to have that same problems. Let's see, moving on to, I know there was another one and we typed a bunch of stuff in between. Okay, here we go. There we go. Xerinx gave us $5 and said, it's almost like spare the rod, spoil the child was a true thing. Yeah, there's quite a bit of wisdom in, I believe that was Proverbs. I could be wrong. It's been quite a while since I've gone through and explored the book of Proverbs. But yeah, the encouragement of timeouts means more coddled kids. Now, one thing I will say is every child is different, and every child responds differently to to their own sort of system of rewards and punishment. And so you will have some kids, like I went to school with a boy that the best way to punish him for something was to inconvenience him. You could beat him within an inch of his life, and it would not have been a deterrent, a behavioral deterrent. But make him wait a minute until after all the other kids had left the classroom when the lunch bell rang, and he would act like you were just about to hang him. and he would do anything to avoid that, anything. So
yeah, I agree.
You tailor it to the kid, and as a parent, like
You do.
I don't think I ever in my entire life had to spank my kid. I don't remember ever having to. Now, I had to be spanked as a kid a couple times, but then I had to be inconvenienced a lot. But no, my son, the way we dealt with things, like, I taught him through examples, and I taught him through getting him to analyze things, because from the time he was a little kid, he was doing that. And it's different for each of the kids, the girls each had different things that affected their learning. And so spare the rod, spoil a child is a true thing, in that you must set limits for your children. You must make rules for your children. You must teach them the reasons for those, and teach them to set limits for themselves and assess their environment and their interests and their like the community they're in and everything, and make sure that they are able to live and work and play within that community without getting themselves in trouble. And that's you do that your own way.
I'll say,
and your kids' way.
I'll say too, right? Like the whole thing that timeouts are like some kind of get out of jail free card, or get out of a beating free card. Like my oldest, we tried timeouts. And at first, because it's like he's a year and a half old or whatever, and he's, repeatedly done something and won't stop. And so, you take the thing away from him, or you take him away from the thing, and he goes right back to it. He thinks it's a game, and he's not taking you seriously. And so you put him in a timeout. And for a year and a half old kid, that timeout would probably be like, a minute, right? A minute in an isolated place like his bedroom, with the door mostly shut, right? Sat on his bed. And we did that once. And he was like 45 minutes or an hour later still hyperventilating from how upset he was over being put in his room alone, like that, and like over the social isolation. And it wasn't that he was like afraid of being alone, because he was alone. He would go into his room and play by himself all the time, but to be put there, right, and told to stay there, oh my God, right? That was like, the social rejection was just absolutely devastating for him. A swat on the seat of the pants through his diaper wouldn't even make him cry, but it just essentially put him on notice that, yeah, no, like, I'm serious, right? And I didn't do it often, because I didn't have to, because he wasn't that kind of kid who really violated boundaries very often, or got into mischief very often. But essentially, spanking was less traumatic. It had less of an impact on his psyche than putting him in a timeout. So we switched to spanking for him.
Yeah, we had, with my household when I was growing up, my brother and I were dramatically different in what we responded to. And my parents quickly figured out that for a lot of things, the best punishment was for me to have to make things right, and admit that I was wrong. Because, like, and admitting I'm wrong, I'm very much like that boy in my class was about being held back a minute from so you're last in the lunch line, I have to be 100% sure that I'm wrong to admit that to admit it, and then I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I go through about a half hour to an hour of being annoyed over it before it's like, oh hey, I learned something, that's cool, and so that was a big one for, like, okay, so what did you do wrong? What should you have done? And why was it wrong, and why should you have done the thing you should have done, or if I wronged a person, then I had to go and make things right with that person and things like that. If I broke something, I had to replace it or fix it or whatever. My brother, a lot of times, he would just do that on his own. It wasn't a punishment for him. It was just, he was just responsible for doing that. He had to do it himself. But And there were certain things that would have hit the level of abuse with him that wouldn't with me. They could send me to my room and I would just sit in there and read. It wasn't even a punishment. Making me go outside was almost a punishment. But my brother, if they had grounded him, it would have been torture. And like, he was an outdoors kid. He was a kid that liked to play with other kids all the time. He was very social. So grounding him would have actually been worse than beating him. And a lot of times with him, he was very much like my son, where you go through and he would analyze the situation. And they would take him through analyzing the situation, and then they would apply a sensible penalty. But it didn't really matter so much what the penalty was as it was that he had gone through and considered all the angles and figured things out for himself. And like each of us had when we were real little, having to get taught that mom and dad were serious with a swat on the butt. But for the most part, like, once we got older, it was a very dramatic difference. Like, for me, being embarrassed was that kind of torture. For him, being trapped in the house was that kind of torture. And so yeah, penalty for a kid is a very different thing for different kids. But moving on, we have John Taylor gave us £5 and said, "Great to see Karen back. All eyes on Scotland for today, Friday, as it's Count Dankula's final trial." Speaking of speech, the importance of speech.
Oh God, yeah, fuck.
Good luck to him. Jesus.
I'm gonna go watch his Hitler Pug video before I go to bed tonight, just in honor
solidarity.
That was the fucking funniest video. Just the I'm just joking. He's not really a Nazi. Right? He's not really a Nazi, blah, blah, blah. And then he shows the pug watching the Hitler speech, and then it's like, wee, 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 or is he, I can't even fucking believe that that's a thing. And what I found hilarious was he said that, he had a neighbor who called him a Nazi, right? And then, like, he and his girlfriend were going out, or his fiance or whatever, were going out to the grocery store, and she yelled at him that he was a Nazi, and he was just like, oh, whatever, right? And went to the store, and then he came home, and she had dumped a bunch of garbage and dog shit on his front porch, right?
Oh, God.
And he called police, and they weren't concerned with the actual dumping of the garbage and dog shit. They arrested this neighbor woman for calling him a Nazi.
So the actual damage, the mess that he had to clean up, and the dumping of the improper dumping of trash,
and the welcome mat he had to throw away. Yeah.
Well, and like illegal dumping, right? In some places, that's jail time and a huge fine, because you are putting trash where trash is not supposed to be, and it can put nasty things in the water table and it'll cause all kinds of other problems. But it's okay that she did that. Just, she called him a Nazi. Shame on her. That's ridiculous. Jesus Christ.
But literally, like, isn't the whole fucking case against Count Dankula that he's, like, promoting Nazism via his
That's what
pug?
I thought,
Or his girlfriend's pug? Like,
yeah,
so
it's really stupid.
So isn't that whole case based on the fact that he is a Nazi? Like, I don't...
I mean, it's not like the damn dog knows what the goddamn sounds mean, or what the gesture means.
What exactly do they think is going to happen, okay? Somebody sees this video of him making fun of the idea of the dog being a Nazi, ridiculing. It'd be like somebody watching a Cheech and Chong movie, like Up in Smoke, and saying, man, I want to be just like those guys. I'm going to go smoke some weed right now. Because, I mean, the whole point of the movie was because...
Hitler in springtime, or whatever.
Springtime for Hitler in Germany. Yeah. And wanted to become a Nazi. Like, Are you kidding me? They think that's going to promote, but they're not upset about the videos on YouTube with ISIS members trying to recruit little boys. No, it's the guy that teaches his dog to make fun of Nazis.
Well, I know, like
intent fucking matters, assholes.
Like, I mean, and I thought it was glorious because he didn't just teach his dog to do the Sieg Heil Salute thing, right? Which is just all that had to do. All that was teaching the dog that Sieg Heil also meant shake a paw.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. He also taught the dog that, gas the Jews also meant, do you want to go for a walk? Right? Because the dog would be like lying there sleeping.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Lying there sleeping, and he'd just go, gas the Jews, and the dog would be like, oh, what are we doing? Oh, I'm excited now. Right? And it's just
it's like those
whispering, just like, gas the Jews. And he would just shoot right up. And it was just
Sometime take a minute and do a search on YouTube for dog hates or cat hates, and just leave it an open-ended search, and you will find like people's names, politicians' names and stuff like that after dog or cat hates, and you'll see these videos of somebody, like there's a dog or cat hates Justin Bieber, and they show a picture of Justin Bieber to the animal on their phone, and the animal attacks the phone. It might just be that the animal hates the phone itself because it makes a nasty noise sometimes, and you don't know exactly because they don't show any of that. But it's
I don't
politicians.
think we can understand.
There's the Chihuahua that reacts insanely to the word diarrhea. You say diarrhea and the Chihuahua goes ballistic. So it's silly to take a piece of training like this, which is kind of hilarious actually, and then treat it like something has been accomplished by it. What you find is that these animals will do this with all kinds of things.
Of course they will, and it's like it's impossible to get into the head of a dog and figure out why the hell she thinks that human ears are so sexy that when she licks them, she needs to start humping things.
It's a weird one.
I don't understand why my dog does that, and I feel very dirty, violated. I feel like I need to scrub myself with some lye and a wire brush.
The dog clearly needs sensitivity training,
and I need some professional counseling, because sometimes my dog, when she lies, because she acts like a cat and she lies on the very back of the couch, even though she's way too big for that, right next to my head, and then she'll just start licking my ear and then start casually humping the couch cushion, and I just it's very traumatizing.
Jeez. Karen's got a rapey dog. That's just the whole of it. But
that's the least of my problems with this dog, though.
Yeah. We're gonna go on to the next super chat. Let's see.
Average
we did
Joe.
Count Dankula's trial. We did Zeering, spare the unfolded child. Average Joe gave us 20 pounds and said, "Please keep up shouting about shit that needs to be shouted about." That makes me think of the old Saturday Night Live sketch on that guy from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. "I'm Robin Leach. I'm shouting and I don't know why." But Jazzy gave us $10 and that's Jazz Y. There's a space there. Gave us $10 and says, and people wonder why MGTOW is a thing. Well, some people do. I think a lot of us have figured out exactly why MGTOW is a thing. Hokey Bukisa gave us $4.20 and says, "Be strunk, be runk." And Duck, formerly known as Censor, gave us $5 so that I would have to say Rarity is best pony. I'm not contradicting anybody that thinks otherwise. This is Duck, formerly known as Censor's opinion. I don't have an opinion.
Pony?
Rarity, apparently. I have no opinion on who is best pony. I think the fan art of the Karen pony was best pony. You have to look that up now.
Sweet.
Somebody said that they were thinking of making a prim pony, and I'm like, actually, that would be pretty cute.
That would be adorable. Alec Ondosco gave us $20 and said, my dad was always retardedly partial to rather excessive spanking. Used to have a plaque on my wall he would use on my bare ass. Eventually got him in trouble because my mom busybodied. I have issues with him, but I hate her. And like that I've noticed happens a lot too. And this is something that is another issue that we'll probably go over on another show in more in depth. There seems to be a pattern, and it's a rather widespread, unnecessary, ridiculous pattern of women foisting disciplinary responsibility off on their husbands and then criticizing how they do it. And like, it's one thing, you're going to say, well, no, wait till your father gets home. Okay, if you're going to do that, you don't get to tell him how to do what you're dumping on, the responsibility that you're dumping on him. It sucks to be the disciplinarian. Having to be the person who disciplines your children sucks. It's not a fun job. Nobody likes it. At least nobody in their right mind likes it. You might get some satisfaction out of it if your child has done something that really has you upset, but you don't like it. And so if you're going to dump the disciplinary responsibilities on the dad, you don't get to then turn around and say, but you're doing it wrong. And that's just my rant on that.
This is what I loved about my mom was every once in a while my dad would come home from work and my mom would greet him at the door before he even came up the porch steps. She'd be at the door with one of us kids and essentially just say to him, take this child before I kill it. And then go off and do whatever it was that she was trying to do, like, I don't know, blanch green beans or something like that, or whatever, when one of us was acting up, right? Take this child before I kill it. She would not say, discipline this child. She would not say, spank this child. She would not say anything. She'd just say, please just take this child off my hands for 15 minutes before I kill it. And we all knew that she wouldn't actually kill us because she was always threatening to do all kinds of things. She'd put her hands in her hair and and pretend to rip her hair out. She always had this whole house full of kids, neighbor kids. She had kids that she babysat, Carrie and Curtis, Carrie was my age and Curtis was just like 2 or 3. And you know, when I was in grade 1 or something like that, and we always had neighbor kids and stuff because the neighbor parents would pay her to feed all the neighbor kids lunch, right? Because a lot of the moms weren't home during the day. And my mom was, so they would give her, I don't know, $10 a week or something like that to feed the kids lunch, right? And we walked home from school to eat lunch and then walk back to school. There was no eating lunch at school. There was no supervision at lunchtime at school. So that was not a thing when I was in school, eating lunch in the school. So essentially, she's one day she's like getting frustrated and the kids are just being like really noisy and annoying. And she grabs her hair and she starts to pretend to pull it out. And she says, that's it. I'm running away from home. And, all of us kids who were used to it were just like, oh yeah, whatever. It's fine. Right. And, cause she's just joking. Right. But letting us know that, you know, we were bothering her, but also just joking. Brian called it friendly angry when I would do it with him. And Carrie looks at me and says, but who's going to take care of Curtis? Who's going to look after Curtis? Right? And I'm like, you've only been here a few days. You'll figure it out, right? She's not going anywhere. But like he was just like, oh my God, because when my mom says things, she really means them. But like, it's just like when I would threaten with my kid, my youngest, when he was like 10 years old, stop that or I will rip your arm off and beat you with it. Right? And does anybody on earth think that my kid would take that in any way seriously? right? Like,
see, I had a
God damn
moment
it.
like that with my dad. I still don't remember the thing that I had done that I was in trouble for. I just remember making him laugh. And I was like, I might have been 7 or 8 years old. It was about the same year I almost backed off the cliff at Hocking Hills trying to take a picture of the mountain. Scared the shit out of him. And I did a bunch of stuff that year that just scared the shit out of my parents. Like, you know, I was 2 seconds from death or less. And they were trying to instill, you know, in my head, think the question, what will happen or what can happen if I do this? You know, and so it was probably something like that. It was probably something as dumb as trying to take a picture of the mountain I was on and backing up and to get a wider angle until I stepped off the edge of the cliff and had to be caught by my dad. So with that in mind, and with the father's panic over this near-death experience for his child, out of her own stupidity in mind, you know, my dad goes into auto lecture mode. Right? He's in the midst of this lecture, and he's like, this is something you do as a parent when your child really does something stupid, and you start with full intent to make a point, and as the reality of this situation gets a grip on your heart, you just keep going and going and going. I can't believe you didn't think this through. I can't believe you were going to do XYZ thing that could have gotten you killed, blah, blah, blah. And if I ever see you do anything like that again, even one more time, I'm going to kick your butt up between your shoulder blades. And he paused there because he was getting a hold of himself to not say, the rest of that line is, you'll have to unbutton your shirt to take a shit. And he wasn't going to say that to a 7-year-old, but his 7-year-old was a very imaginative little kid who thought in images. So I got this mental image, and it was cartoons too. It wasn't, you know, like not a physical person, but an actual cartoon drawing of me as a little kid and my butt getting kicked up between my shoulder blades and these really long legs sticking out underneath and this really surprised, wide-eyed look on my face. And of course I giggled. And my dad, you know how dads are, do you think that's funny? Do you think that's funny? And I was like, yeah. And then and you could see, I could see the wheels turning. He could see that I was picturing it. And then he pictured it. He pictures it. He sees what's in my head, you know, because he knew how my head worked. And instantly, the entire disciplinary scenario breaks down. And my father and I are laughing together at this image of me with my butt kicked up between my shoulders. This horribly violent image, right? and we're laughing about it. But then we had a very solid talk about impulse control and thinking before you do things. And just because you're curious about something doesn't mean that you risk yourself to satisfy your curiosity and all that. So it was probably something similar to the time I tried to touch the phone line and got shocked by it because it was actually a power line. It arced and hit me, so I didn't actually die, but it still sucked. But going on from all of that, let's see, our last one was Be Strunk, Be Wunk. So,
no, it was
Ronk.
Alec Ondesco that we read last.
Oh, you're right. So we have R3 Psyche, gave us $5 and says, "Go Honey Badgers!" And then Zomara0292 gave us $6 and says, "Applejack is better than Best Pony. To infinity!" Darn it, I lied. I feel bad now. And then another $6. Oh, I got that. Oh, I see. That's the week I copied it twice. Okay. Paul Grofton gave us $5 and says, visit 1111 blog at WordPress, men's rights and men's issues and hot naked babes on private... No.
on the hot naked babes
on private site articles, feminist New Year's Eve resolution. Oh God, feminist New Year's Eve resolutions sounds scary. No. Then we have Zomara0292 gave us another $2 and said, "Sorry for dragging you into this war." Then we have Alec Ondusco gave us another $20 and said, "My mother was pretty physically harsh too. The busybodying was post-divorce to make up for him doing well in the divorce. Sis and I now live with Dad, have nothing to do with her. I doubt I'll forgive her for what she did to me." And that's a rough one. And I saw that with my stepdaughters. Although I don't know that the mom was physically harsh, it was psychological. She a great deal of relational aggression directed at me, but through the kids, and that was unfair. That was really unfair.
My mom was physically harsh in terms of spanking, right? Like,
oh, my mom was like that too. She had the wooden spoon of death.
Yeah, no, but my mom wouldn't do, like, some parents would do this thing. Some parents that I knew would do this thing where they would make their child go into the kitchen and get the wooden spoon and bring it, right? And like, which is a humiliating thing for a child, and it's a traumatizing thing for a child, right? That's actually more traumatizing than actually just getting the smack, right?
The traumatizing thing my mom would do was, like, my mom didn't wear shoes. You find my mom in shoes, it was a miracle. All right, and so I'd be doing something, and I would think I wasn't being noticed, and all of a sudden, from directly behind me, without warning, no noise, no nothing that would let me know that Mom had come up behind me, the voice of God would boom in my, "What are you doing?" You know, and it would be one of those things that was deserving of "What are you doing?" Like, get that fork away from that power outlet right now, and you know, that kind of. And then she would have to peel me off the ceiling with a spatula, and then we would have, you know, the disciplinary moment, the discussion and everything. But and then the other end of that was she would come up behind with the wooden spoon. If she was cooking, she had a wooden spoon in her hand, right? And then, so there would be kerwhack. "What do you think you're doing?" and that would be the end of it. But yeah, no, it wasn't that traumatizing.
I could never sneak up on my kids because all through my life my tendons have snapped, right? So if I get up, no matter how quiet I try, I could never be a ninja. No matter how quiet I try to move, that tendons in my ankles and my knees are going pow, 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 pow. But with my mom, she only used a wooden spoon because she has von Willebrands or whatever the fuck it is, and I have similar vascular or it's sort of almost an opposite vascular condition called Raynaud's, and they both leave you vulnerable to breaking blood vessels. So and quite intense bruising and things like that. So if she actually spanked us quite mildly with her hand, she would actually hurt her hand more than she would hurt our bums, right? But she never engaged in that kind of like, it was the immediate thing. Observe the bad behavior, swat on the seat of the pants, right? Or go get the wooden spoon, bring it, you know, like she would go get it, grab it, right? Bring it, swat on the seat of the pants. You know, immediate, and none of that kind of ritualized bullshit that a lot of parents engaged in, which was like, go get your father's belt and then go lie on the bed. Like I had actual, and pull down your pants, right? Like I had actual friends who were like, that's what they get in the house, get your father's belt, go get your pants down and lie down on the bed. Right. And it was like, oh my fucking God, like what kind of bondage scenario is that? Right. Like that was just fucked up, right? Kid, right?
Well,
and I was a kid.
Previous generations, it was go cut a switch from the willow tree.
Yeah, and I was a kid who was spanked regularly, right? I was spanked regularly. I never felt particularly traumatized by it, right? In fact, the primary traumatizing force in my house was not my mother and the spankings that occasionally were more commensurate with the time of the month than the severity of the offense. But it was my father's disappointment, or sometimes he went above and beyond disappointment and actually expressed kind of a, I wouldn't say disgust, but at, like a contempt for a particular behavior, right? Usually it was lying, right? If he caught you in a lie, there was this kind of visceral reaction and that was what we lived in fear of, me and my sisters. And it wasn't because we were going to be physically punished. It was because we had earned his disapproval. And he was never the one who was heavy-handed. He was never the one who really disciplined us or anything like that. But it was almost like, because he was such an honorable man and because he was so consistent in his values, right? When he was just like, okay, you are beyond the pale right now. That was something that really was, that was the thing that we lived in fear of, and it didn't happen often. But that was the thing that really was the thing that would upset us. And as for my mom, she was just like, she just like, I mean, she's a stay-at-home mom. She's got all these kids to deal with, including lots of kids that aren't hers. And you got to maintain order somehow.
Yeah, that you do. We have one last super chat. Alec Undusku gave us $5 more and said, "Oh God, my parents constantly did the funny rage, but Mom never also laughed." That was when, like, I could make my parents could be in the midst of like the most exasperated, going to kill this child right now kind of rage, where like I had just totally blown their minds with how nonsensical my behavior could be, and how absolutely inconveniencing and annoying it could be, right? And then in the midst of being lectured, I could come up with something, or do something, or say something, or get a look on my face even, that would just like, it would just totally destroy the rage. The rage would dissipate, and the whole thing would, and it was like, I don't know if you've ever seen drawings and portrayals of Beverly Clary's character Ramona Quimby, but I looked like that. I was just this curious looking little brown-haired, plain as a mouse little girl, and always looked sincere even when I was not. So it was, and my dad could see through that, my mom could see through that, but they still, I'd turn that look on them and say something like, or giggle, like the moment with the butt up between the shoulder blades comment, and that would be it. It would break the tension, and it would go back to just an ordinary conversation about, hey, you fucked up, this is how, I want you to think about this, and what could have happened, and you're in trouble, and this is going to be the repercussions. But going on from there, on our with regards to our topic, there's a couple of things I want to bring up before we finish the show. So we're going to run long tonight. One of them is a recent article. This came out on January 1st. And this was a situation that is just absolutely atrocious. Like, this is false accusations in and of themselves are atrocious on their own. You don't have to have anything to add to them. But there's a layer of egregiousness that was added to this by the legal response to the false accusations, and the mother continuing to make them after this response began to occur. The headline, this is a Daily Mail article. The headline is, "Woman who made a series of unfounded sex abuse allegations against her ex-partner is now barred from seeing her 4-year-old daughter." And the reason is, it goes on underneath to highlight, the woman had made persistent and unsubstantiated allegations about the youngster being sexually abused by her father, and because of those allegations, the child was forced to undergo repeated intimate examinations because of the claims. So a child who had not been sexually abused was essentially sexually abused medically in response to the mother's false accusations against the father. And this was a situation, all they did to her was bar her from being around the child. There is nothing in here in this article about her being prosecuted. There's nothing in the article about perjury or lying to police during an investigation or filing a false charge, filing a false complaint. Nothing. Just, you can't see the kid. And I know that that's a harsh punishment, but for crying out loud, what she did was the equivalent of a sexual assault.
Well, what frustrates me is the same feminists who would excuse this woman, right? Like who would be essentially, well, you shouldn't prosecute her because, it would deter other mothers from coming forward with their suspicions that their children were sexually abused or whatever, right? Because that's what the excuse always is, right? These are the same women who say that subjecting a woman to a transvaginal ultrasound before okaying an abortion is in itself an act of rape, requiring a woman to go through that. Now, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. There is a time limit on abortions in many states, okay? And before that time limit is up, right? The only way to really get a good look inside the uterus at something that small in order to date it, right? In order to accurately date it is transvaginal. I know this because I had suspected lesions on my uterus, right? They suspected that I had lesions and they did not send me for an abdominal ultrasound. They sent me for a transvaginal ultrasound because that's the only way to detect and measure anything as small as what they're looking for, right? Okay, so in order to date the pregnancy, right, they need to do it this way. And if a transvaginal ultrasound is not necessary, then you're already too far along to get an abortion in these states, right? If you could actually accurately date the pregnancy through an abdominal ultrasound, you are already too far along to abort that fetus, okay, legally. So, and they need to know this because depending on how big the fetus is, that's going to affect what kind of procedures they're going to use in the abortion.
All right, but they do consider, feminists will go on and on about how a medically necessary procedure is supposedly rape.
This is an arbitrary requirement that is the equivalent of raping a woman. Now, I have, as I said, I have been through actually 2 transvaginal ultrasounds, and they're actually much less unpleasant than the typical pap smear, which apparently is every woman's right on a yearly basis funded by government. They're less invasive and less uncomfortable than a fucking pap smear.
Well, they're certainly less invasive and less uncomfortable than as a little girl when you don't even understand what's happening. I know, and it's like having a physician examine your vagina for signs of a sexual assault. Not just once, okay, but over and over and over again. Or when you're a little boy having your anus or your penis examined that same way. And this wasn't like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old that everybody thought was just lying about. This was a 4-year-old child.
And here's the thing too, Hannah, is that like when I was, in my early 20s, I suffered from a condition called vaginismus, which is sort of a spastic, spasms in the vaginal muscles, right? And it made intercourse almost impossible. And I have no idea how I got it, and I have no idea why I had it. And I went through some physical therapy that was very interesting, and I can fill you in on it all later if you want. Okay, but when I went in for my pap smears during that period, they used a speculum. And I don't know if the men in the audience know what this is, but a speculum is essentially the opposite of a clamp. It's got long arms, and you
basically to prop you open.
You crank it open so that you can look. And that is what. And so my doctor was whenever he needed to examine me, give me a pap smear, all of that, he would use the speculum that they had for children. And which was extremely small. It was essentially a clamp, maybe the size of a finger, and that would, to insert, and then you would crank it open just the tiniest little bit, and you would look in with the little light that you have to look into people's ears, right? And that's what that little girl would have had to have gone through if she was being examined for potential sexual abuse. And she would have had to have the inside walls of her vagina and her cervix swabbed and all of those things for semen and everything else. A thorough exam for any kind of sexual abuse involves vaginal swabs that involve inserting things into the vagina or into any orifice that might have been violated, right? So, I mean, it's not just he was looking at her labia. I mean, it's like
they would look inside. He was looking and everything.
Yeah, it's not like he was like she had a strange doctor who was essentially doing what somebody would do when changing a diaper. No, it was having things inserted inside her.
Without any context, she wouldn't have any way to understand what was going on. They might have explained, that they had to do this to, for her health or something. They might explain to a little kid that we have to make sure you're not hurt, and this is where we have to look. And this is the worst thing, as a kid. If you don't want something like that done, you're going to explain to everybody around you, I'm not hurt, I'm fine, nothing's happened to me, and they won't, and you'd not be believed. As traumatic as feminists say it is to not be believed when you describe a sexual assault that happens to you, and I've experienced both of these scenarios, it is 10 times worse to be not believed when you say, I was not assaulted, nothing happened to me, nobody did anything to me, nobody is guilty of doing anything to me, don't pursue this person on my behalf because he didn't do anything to me, and not be believed.
And please don't mess with my fucking vagina because you are desperate to prove that he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And just to be 4 years old and go through that, to be 3 years old and go through that, because there's a series of false accusations. This kid must have gone through this for at least a year, through the court system and everything. And then you have on top of that, you have the intrusive questioning. You have the psychiatrist demanding that the child tell the doctor where the bad man touched you, and point on the doll and all that stuff, and saying, this didn't happen to me, stop telling me to tell you how it happened and when it happened and where it happened. It didn't happen. Having to stick to that at that age, or worse, having somebody bully you into grudgingly going along with it. Because eventually you're dealing with adults with authority. Eventually you're going to be, in some way or another, disciplined into saying what they want you to say. That's got just far-reaching consequences for the child.
Oh, not just that. Often, like if that 4-year-old, if what she had said, if she had caved in, she had given in and said, yes, my daddy touched me in my bad place or whatever, right? And he went to prison for that. What would be her psychological recourse? What would be her choice? Her choices to be able to contextualize that decision, right? She could say to herself, I lied, and I lied. And my dad is in prison. My dad, who I love, is in prison because I lied. Or she could say, I didn't lie. They were all right. I just didn't really know. I didn't really remember it or whatever, but he actually is really a bad guy, and that's my father. That's half my genes. That's half my identity. That's half of who I am, is somebody who would do that to a child.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, you're putting this kid in this position where there is no way to be psychologically healthy, no matter what she does, right? If she caves in, if she actually goes along with it.
Yeah, and this is a situation where here we have this damage has been done to a child. This is, without question, this is child abuse, not just conflict between the parent and the child, not just conflict between the parent and the other parent. Flat out, overt, unadulterated, unvarnished child abuse. Some of it by proxy and some of it directly. And the only thing that was done to the abuser was to separate the abuser from the victim for however many years it takes before the abuser can convince another judge to overturn the first one because mommy pain. And that's a distinct possibility. And this is a situation where if women were equally accountable to the degree that men are held accountable for criminal behavior, that abuse would have led to prosecution. And the lies would have led to prosecution. None of this would have gone without consequences beyond you're separated from your victim.
I don't understand when society, when the system essentially gives women like all of these incentives to do this stuff, right? To lie about domestic violence, to lie about child abuse, to lie about sexual violence, to lie about sexual abuse, to lie about, these essentially gendered violence against women and girls, right? Or male violence against women and children, right? When the system gives them all these incentives to do that, right? Because there are like a multitude of rewards, whether what you're going for is revenge or whether what you're going for is custody and a good divorce settlement or whatever, right? They give these women these incentives. There are these incentives. Everybody fucking knows it, right? And then nobody gets actually prosecuted when they abuse that process. And then we still have people saying, oh, but no woman would ever do that, right? Like no woman would, like, is there any other area of society where you can actually say, like, just flat out, just like on the loudspeakers in the town square, announce, okay, today is the day you can take anything off of the shelves at any store you want, right? And you will not be prosecuted. You will not even be considered to have done wrong, right? Nobody will frown on you for it. There are no social consequences. There are no legal consequences. Just fucking free for all. Do what you want. Okay? Does anybody think that the rates of theft, smash and grab, frickin' looting, whatever you want to call it, would be exactly the same on that day as on any other fucking day?
Of course not. Anybody that doesn't have compunctions of their own against theft, anybody that the thing that is deterring them is the consequences of their actions. Anybody that's in that situation would definitely be ripping off everything they could get their hands on. Hell, you watch what happens when there is a riot, a riot over political anger, a riot over any kind of wrongdoing by the state. And one of the first things that happens once everything gets out of control is you get a percentage of the rioters that start smashing and grabbing. And they'll even be organized. Oh, hey, there's a riot. The cops are busy controlling the riot. Let's go loot. Same thing in disaster. If there's a hurricane, if there's a fire, if there's anything where a particular area has to be locked down or evacuated, and there are not cops on the streets, and there is nobody watching, and the stores are unattended, smash and grab happens. That's when it happens, and it is organized. You'll see them form a chain. One person smashes the window, another person goes inside, starts handing stuff out, and they run it to the car from there. It's you would think, and that's people. That's organisms. There's always going to be a segment of the population, male and female, by the way, that will do whatever they can get away with doing.
Well, and it's not even just the people who feel like that they'll do whatever they can get away with doing legally. I mean, there the social consequences too, right? But then at the same time, you have this sort of Greek chorus, right, of feminist and gynocentric sort of, well, he's a man, right? And so he deserves whatever he gets anyway, right? You have, like, I have
or
described
so he
it,
must
actually,
have done something.
Yeah, Dean Esme's ex-wife, and I'm gonna actually use Dean Esme as an example because he described something that his ex-wife described to him, right? She said that when they were divorcing, she said that she had a lawyer on one side of her and a social worker on the other saying, just say he hit you, right? You'll get a restraining order. It'll be easy peasy, right? And then when she wouldn't do that, they changed it. Don't say you don't have to say he hit you. You can just say that you are afraid of him, right? That you're scared, and you'll be able to get the restraining order, right? And then it'll be easy peasy. You'll get custody. You'll get the house. You'll get all of that stuff, right? You get a leg up. And so you literally have these two people who are in positions of authority, positions of not just legal authority, but moral authority, a lawyer and a social worker, right? Who are essentially saying to you, lie, because that's the right thing to do, right? So it's not even just that you have the incentive of going after this stuff, right? You also have people in positions of moral authority who are giving you moral permission to do that. Oh, it's not a bad thing. Like, honestly, like, and this is the really fucked up thing, because I'm going to relate something because when I split up with my ex, right, there was no way I was going to kick him out of the house to have him go stay in a fucking hotel and waste a whole bunch of money. That was like fucking retarded. We were dirt poor. Like, what the fuck is, like, he was like, do you want me to move out tonight? And I'm like, what? Right? Like, no, I'll sleep on the couch. You take the bedroom. And when you find an apartment, right, then I'll help you move out. Right. Because we're not going to fritter away our freaking marital assets that we need to divide between us on you renting a fucking hotel room. Like, when it's, so he was living in the house for 3 weeks after we were legally separated, before he found an apartment. And when I phoned my mom and I phoned my friend, and I, told them that, I've asked for a divorce. And so, we're getting a divorce. And the very first thing out of their mouths, both of them, which pissed me off because I thought my mother was better than this, was, is he still in the house? And I was like, yeah. And then they said, do you feel safe? And I was like, well, I don't now. Thanks a lot. Like, why would you even say that? I felt perfectly safe until somebody suggested to me that I might not be safe. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Right? Like, Mom, you've known this guy for 15 fucking years. Do you think he's gonna murder me in my sleep? Like, who would fucking cook for the kids? Who would wash their hair? Like, just in pragmatic terms, why would he kill me? Like, I just, like, I'm just like, so, but you have this situation where it's not only just that people know they can get away with it, they're actually being encouraged to do it. And they're actually being told not just that there are not going to be any repercussions to their actions, but that they may get not just what they wanted out of the divorce settlement, but they'll get a "you go girl," right, along with it. And so, I mean, like, it's all reward for these women who do this, unless their behavior is so unbelievably egregious, right, that some judge somewhere says, you know what, lady, you need to be fucking reined in.
And that is a situation that is widespread too. And I've heard stories of women being talked into making claims, getting restraining orders and stuff like that, on the off chance that the guy is going to become an entirely different person than the person that they knew when they decided to file for the divorce. And that's actually part of why I got involved with the movement and everything, was this treatment of men as these Jekyll and Hyde people that the moment they don't get what they want, they turn into predatory assailants. And it's not true. You know, a man who's hurt is not necessarily likely to do that. I'm going to move us on from this, because we're after 10 o'clock. We're almost at 10:30, and Prim had some research that she wanted to share that was also pertinent to this, and it's in relation to, if I understand correctly, women as abusers. And that's important as well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels a little off topic now, but I'll try and cover it quickly so that we're not left here forever. But basically, my school library has a wide variety of research. And if you search women and IPV, intimate partner violence, you get lots of research talking about how women are victims of this problem. But if you search men and IPV, you get a couple of articles talking about how men are abusers and perpetrators. But funny enough, I actually did find a really impressive article that talks about the perception of abused men. And I thought that it was really worthwhile sharing, because it's actually great that somebody is writing research about this. And I really appreciated this, and I hope that you guys will too. So the title of this one is "Perceived Characteristics of Men Abused by Female Partners: Blaming, Resulting, Blaming Excuses, or Normal." And I wanted to read more of this, but I'm just going to read this one little bit in the discussion that kind of summarizes everything up. Lending to the complexity of abused men's stigma is the attribution of characteristics often ascribed to abusers. Descriptions such as rude, insecure, jerk, overcompensating, or overbearing mother imply victimization from females is not acceptable for psychologically healthy men. Interestingly, similar characteristics have been attributed to men who abuse. Instead of seeing men as responsible for not controlling their own relationships, these participants viewed men's culpability as due to their overuse of certain masculine characteristics. Rather than view these men as only passive, some participants appeared to see no other explanation than to reframe the victims as the bad guy deserving of abuse. And then skip ahead a little bit. Used as both blameworthy causes and post-abuse outcome descriptors, these categories suggest abused men are affected not only by relational victimization, but also by secondary effects from culpable stigmas. The many negative outcomes of stigma, e.g., increased economic difficulty, psychodynamic symptomology, and social barriers, suggest that cursory application may exacerbate identity coping problems from men abused by intimate partners. In other words, if abused men are blamed for being too feminine and too masculine, what are their options?
Well, there you go. Right? This is really the thing, is that men are the only ones who are, like, if somebody is misbehaving, right? Point to the nearest man and essentially say it's all his fault, right? If he's the victimizer, it's his fault. If he's the victim, it's also his fault.
It's his fault. Yeah.
Yeah, it's his it's his failure because he provoked her because he was too masculine, or he was unable to be masculine enough to control his partner's behavior. Right.
I'm really glad that there is research like this being done that is showcasing the hypocrisy about this and pointing this out and saying, this is something that is wrong. We need to challenge this.
It's like, it's amazing to me because like, I was watching I went, you know, because I was sick this afternoon. Like I've been sick for like 2 weeks, but I was sort of, I like to fall asleep watching old videos that I've already watched before, right? And I was watching a Noel Plum video. I forget which one, but I got into it in the comments section with a feminist there who was essentially trying to defend the CDC and the FBI on their definitions of rape, and essentially saying, well, I don't think that they were intentionally trying to exclude men who were victims of made to penetrate. I don't think that that was intentional, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then I went off on this like freaking brutal fucking rant on her after like a big, long back and forth exchange. But what's infuriating to me is that feminists have had to be, and she was like, okay, so there's this one, she linked me to a Tumblrina, a Tumblr feminist who called out Mary Koss on her definition of rape, and her exclusion of male victims of made to penetrate from that. And she said, see, so she's suffered reputational damage. Mary Koss has suffered reputational damage because this one fucking Tumblr feminist called her out, right?
Oh my God. Her career is over now.
I was like, okay, you know, a lot of this research has been kind of floating around out there since the late 70s, early 80s, right? Like Lara Stempel, who has been very, very good. She still takes sort of a feminist view of things. But she's been very, very good about sexual violence against men, and just the absolute non-thing it is in terms of the UN, governments, non-governmental organizations, charities, all of that. They just don't fucking care, right? And she's been dealing with research. She's been bringing up research that's existed since the 1980s. On sexual violence against men, right? And I'm like, okay, you know, you're going to have to forgive me for not giving that Tumblr feminist a whole lot of credit, because there are a whole lot of people like me who have been called whiners, man babies, piss babies, you know, beard tears, sorry I hurt your man feels, right? I drink male tears, cry some more, man baby, misogynist, rape apologist, woman hater, freaking, you know, like domestic violence apologist, right? We've been called all of these things, and we've been called them while we were dragging that one fucking Tumblr feminist, kicking and screaming against her will, right? And forcing these facts down her throat until they stuck. Okay? That is what we have been facing. That is what we still face, right? To convert that one Tumblr feminist into the point where she is willing to say, yeah, Mary Koss is kind of a bitch. Right? Oh, did that cost Mary Koss her job? Consulting with the CDC? You know, did it actually cause her reputational damage? Did it, and
her
have we stopped
methodology
being called?
Her methodology is being used by the UN now.
Yeah, and are we no longer called misogynists and rape apologists and woman haters and man babies and crybabies and fucking whiners, right? You know, like, seriously, this has been like a 40 or 50 year fucking battle. Yeah. And oh my God, we managed to red pill one Tumblr feminist.
So no accountability.
And now you're like, okay, so all of feminism is now absolved of all of this because there was one feminist who called out Mary Koss.
So there's really no accountability among feminists for
None!
for this deliberate effort to obscure male victims of female perpetrators, either of domestic violence or sexual violence. And it's been decades. They've known about this for decades. They've obscured it deliberately for decades, and for decades we've had, quote, nice, end quote, feminists excusing the phenomenon by saying, well, I don't believe that, and I'm what feminism really is. Don't pay any attention to these people that are getting laws passed. And my response to that is, feminists don't understand cake. They do not understand that you cannot have your cake and eat it too. They take credit for laws getting passed that these people lobbied for when they think these laws are good. That means that they cannot turn around and say, but feminism is not responsible when these people get bad laws passed. The men who passed them are responsible. No, either you don't get credit or you're responsible. You don't get both. I'm going to go ahead with the rest of these super chats. While Karen was talking, we got a whole bunch more. So we had $5 from Chris Stewart gave us $5 and says, I stopped looking at furry porn for this. I guess badgers are fine too. Also, Celestia, best pony. And then I'm going to save this next one, so I'm going to go on. Chris gave us actually a bunch. He says he gave us $10 more and says at times like this, or at times I feel like I'm only better than feminists by default. That is, they have power. I find myself getting annoyed by stupid shit like cartoon girls being badass while the boys are goofy. And then he gave us another $5 and continued that statement with, like, a feminist complaining about skimpy RPG characters. Viking Insane gave us $2 and said, why is Canada chock full of leftist retards? My answer is, you misspelled progressive. Because I do still divide the left very starkly between the regressive end of it that calls themselves progressive and the classic liberal that wants everybody to be treated fairly and thinks that, you know, we just need to all learn to get along. Geez, we're getting more while I'm speaking. Chris Stewart gave us another $5 and told us about a typo in his super chat, but I'm not going to tell you what it was. Then Zamara0292 gave us $2 and said, last one this time, good night. Ziranx gave us $5 and said, can we say nice feminists are like nice mobsters with the follow-up statement of always be wary of them? And I think that's appropriate. Then the very last ones that we have here are from Hokibukisa, who gave us $10 and said, it's true that some people just do not view men as people. And he gave us $4.20 after that and said, unworthy of compassion. And with that, I'm going to end the discussion for tonight. We will be moving on to more discussion on this, and I will not be reading any more super chats. There will be more discussion on this next week. The part that I mentioned before that we're gonna discuss. That's gonna be the main topic next week. We might refer back to this simply because it's such a big topic. But if you want to be able to hear us, just remember that here at Honey Badger Radio, we have been labeled guilty of wrong thinking. As such, we are on the wrong side of YouTube. If you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because our channels have been incarcerated, or because the YouTube stream just keeps farting like it did tonight, go to badgerfeed.com. Also, we've moved to a digest format for podcasting, so if you want to listen to this in an audio format and still follow our uncut live streams, you will also be able to find those at badgerfeed.com. So just go to badgerfeed.com, man. It's where all the cool kids are. And to all the cool kids listening tonight, to my very patient co-hosts, and to everyone who helps make Honey Badger live streams happen, especially the people that have to sort through all of this talking for the condensed version of this show. Thank you very much, and good night.